Welcome to Choose the Nickel. I'm your host, George Bailey. My co-founder and technical support is the gorgeous Christina Bailey. This podcast is about giving kids financial freedom. We're interviewing fascinating people for their insights about how children learn to be financially savvy. Our guests come from diverse, sometimes conflicting schools of thought, and we love the opportunity to learn from them. We encourage all to weigh our guests' ideas on how to help children thrive, both financially and in general. We invite you to visit our website at www.choosethenickel.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and try out the things we are learning on the podcast. Our next guest is Rhonda Hamm-Niebruegge, the director of St. Louis Lambert International Airport since January 2010. She manages 500 employees with revenues averaging $165 million annually. Rhonda is also the chairwoman of the 17-member St. Louis Airport Commission and serves on the board of directors of many organizations, both nationally and locally. Ladies and gentlemen, Rhonda Hamm-Niebruegge. Rhonda Hamm-Niebruegge, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to hear from you.
Well, I'm really excited to do this interview because I know that you have a terrific track record in terms of directing the airport and some of the work that you've done in your industry. And I would love to hear from you. What are your greatest professional achievements, those things that make you the most proud?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I was very proud of the work we've done after the tornado struck here at our airport on April of 2011. So I think the team really rallied together to show the community the strengths that we have. And so I was very proud of that weekend and what we were able to accomplish. Obviously, across the industry, it won a lot of recognition. I think probably one of the other accomplishments for my career was when I was named as the Vice President for North American Operations for TWA. So TWA's largest department was airport operations, and I had the great pleasure of running that department for a number of years, and really the first female in the industry from a legacy carrier to run an airport operations department. So it was about 8,000 employees, and so it was one of those achievements that I look back on today and say it was one of my highlights of my career.
When you have 8,000 employees, what are you able to do to really get to know them?
You know, I think you take it day by day and constantly be out at the stations. In the case of that particular job, you know, I had 100 stations that I were responsible for where TW operated in. So I spent a lot of time on the road. And even though you can't remember and memorize everybody's name and face, what you can do is make an impact with them from an upper-level management position to the grassroots employees and how important they are to a company. So being out in front of them, just having conversations, walking amongst them in the operation, sitting in their break rooms, chatting about what's happening within the company, I think those are the things that leave an impact, and those are the things that I think employees remember. And along the way, you meet a lot of people and you hear a lot of stories and you realize the importance of your role and how many people rely on that management team for their job security, for making sure that they can provide for their families. And so I think the impact, not only to the employees, but to myself as an individual, that was some of the greatest, I think feedback that I could get in some of the times that I cherish, just knowing that impact that you make and how important it is to be visible, to make the employees feel that they're just as important as you are in the company.
Back to the tornado. Give us an idea of the scale of that. I remember when it happened. I had already moved to St. Louis by then. I was getting used to the idea of tornadoes, having come from the West Coast where all we have to worry about is earthquakes. But, tell me, what was so bad about that particular tornado?
Well, it wasn't F4, so there's only 5 categories. So, it wasn't F4. So it was one of the strongest tornadoes that could hit a facility. And I think what was so devastating for us was that when it hit the terminal, the impact, it was, that was not the path it was supposed to have taken. So it took a very sharp turn right at the very end, came across and hit the terminal. But shortly after it hit and I arrived at the airport, I think the impact of looking at the front of our historic main terminal was totally blown out. There were no windows left. And then where the tornado actually, once it came through the front of the building, it almost took a leap up and then came back down what was our C concourse, which was our busiest concourse at the time in the terminal, and, just ripped through that concourse. So the devastation was phenomenal. I mean, it basically took out an entire concourse of operation. It took out the front of our terminal from a window perspective. Fortunately, we had no lives lost, and that was probably the silver lining and everything, is that everybody was safe and sound, and a couple of very minor injuries. But looking at the devastation of what a 2-minute tornado can do, I think leaves you with the impact forever.
Yeah.
About the strength of something like that.
I was a kid when the 1989 earthquake happened in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And, that lasted for a matter of seconds. But it was amazing, the damage. I mean, you just feel so small. What were the defining attributes in your own leadership style that helped you to lead the airport through this crisis?
Well, I think, again, the biggest piece was the visibility. I told our team we're going to be around the clock in front of the news media, making sure the public and the officials, I reported to the mayor of the city of St. Louis. It was obviously critical for him to understand where we were in this process and how soon we were going to be able to reopen this airport. So I think we set a very strategic plan from the minute we sat down when our team arrived here at the airport to say, okay, where are we at? Tell me all of the damage. Tell me the things that we have to repair. And so we did a very systematic, meeting every hour, getting updates, understanding the damage, understanding, what we needed to reopen. And then we shared that with the public. I mean, we were doing press conferences every 2 hours throughout the evening, talking to the community, making sure they knew this was the impact, making sure that they knew there was no loss of life, making sure they knew that if they had someone coming into this airport or leaving this airport, that our plan was to reopen over that weekend. It was a holiday weekend. It was Easter. So lots of families coming in and out, lots of, people visiting relatives. And so I think it was critically important that we didn't shy from it and we didn't let the rumor mill take over the story. We, the airport, were the face of that weekend, and we were very upfront with people about what was happening, what it needed to happen in order for us to reopen, and along the way, the milestones that we were reaching or some of those that we couldn't reach. And I think that style of leadership was just, some certainty of the facts and knowing that we're not scared. We're here to do this. It's another trial, another tribulation, but we're going to get through this. And I think that came across very well to the public.
That's awesome. And thank you for keeping St. Louis up and running. In full disclosure, this is my home now. I love this place, and it's great to have a good exit and entry. So now you grew up on a farm, though, right?
I did. I grew up in the Boot Hill of Missouri with 3 brothers on a farm, and our family still has the farm. My parents have since moved off of it, but still a part of our life, yes.
That's great. Now, did you have any serious fear of tornadoes back then?
Well, in the Boot Hill, tornadoes, it's a flat area of Missouri, so tornadoes were very common. And as a child, that wasn't one of those things that we were fearful of. We were very well aware of them. We had a cellar at our house, and no farmhouse, and we had a cellar. And as a child, I can remember numerous times going down in the cellar. So we were aware of the danger. We were aware of the devastation that they can cause. But at the same time, I don't think that we were fearful of them because we were always cautious.
You ever seen the movie Twister?
I have. Yes, I have.
Thoughts on Twister from your perspective? I got to hear it from somebody who grew up with tornadoes, because my whole perspective is skewed. I grew up with earthquakes.
I love the movie. I think it does it's got some humor to it, but especially when when the cow goes flying across the road, and I shouldn't be laughing, but it takes humor with the seriousness of realizing natural disasters and the impact and how we have to be careful of them. And I think I can remember as a child there was a tornado. There was a shoe factory that was in a very close neighboring town to the farm that we lived in, and I remember a tornado came through and right through the center of that shoe factory, and for acres and acres, the day that it hit shortly afterwards, there were shoes strewn everywhere. And I remember,
oh, wow.
The factory owner at the time coming saying, it's open. If you want to try to find a pair of matching shoes and they fit, they're yours.
He took it like a champ.
That image we'll never forget. I can remember going through that field looking for a pair of shoes that that might work. And so, it is one of those things that I think the movie shows you the reality of what a storm or tornado can do. But it also, I think, the movie says, that you have to be strong and you have to get through things. So I think it's got a dual message. I love the movie.
It always made me kind of laugh. Yeah, it was fun. And I'm a little bit of a nut for blockbusters, not like a huge deep thinker on the films and all, but I always laughed because there were good tornado chasers and bad tornado chasers. That to me always seemed a little bit over the top. I was like, oh, come on. They're all good. But now going back to the shoes, do you remember the specific pair of shoes that you were able to pick up? Or did you have I got 10 pairs of shoes out of this? What was, how did you score?
I do remember coming home with a pair of shoes. Quite honestly, I cannot remember the type that I picked up. I was maybe 10 at the time. I just remember this field of shoes and how vivid today. And literally, there were hundreds of people out there looking for shoes. And I, three brothers, so Mom and Dad were all saying, okay, everybody's going to go look. That's what everyone else is doing. So I can't remember the pair of shoes I got, but I do know that I got a pair. I remember bringing home a pair of shoes. But
it's kind of like shopping at an outlet store. You go in and you think I'm going to hunt. And I'm going to find that pair of shoes, and it's going to be worth it. And everything's going to be mismatched and, wrongly priced. But, that's good. So I imagine you got some good lessons out of that. Now, one of the stories that you've told me in the past that I love is that you were afraid of snakes. Is that right?
Still to this day, I'm scared to death of snakes.
Tell me about that. Where did that come from? Give me a little bit more.
Yeah, so the farm that we grew up on is in the Boot Hill of Missouri, and the area does have a lot of black snakes. And we called it a river, although it was a creek that ran sort of right through the middle of our farm. And so black snakes are not harmful; they're not poisonous snakes, but they're, to me, very frightening. They're black and they're kind of eel looking. And I had three brothers who loved to torment their only sisters. So, I would find snakes in my bed, in my dresser drawers, anywhere that they could put them. And these would not be dead snakes or rubber snakes. These were live black snakes. So, it used to be sort of their torture and their comedy relief for the week to hear me scream. And then, of course, my dad would not be happy with the boys, and they had consequences. But to this day, they tell those stories to my own children. My husband knows about them. So when my own kids were little, they would buy rubber snakes and they would put them in my bed. And I'm thinking, this is not funny. Your mother's scared to death of snakes. But so stop this. But it's the story that comes up every Christmas or every Thanksgiving when we're together. It is a story that never dies about the black snakes in my bed or the black snakes that my brothers, put in my drawers, and to them it was worth the whooping just to see me, scared and screaming and running. So, my fear of snakes has never gone away.
I will never complain about anything my brothers and sisters did to me as a kid ever again. That is really, really traumatic. I can only imagine. But you grew up on a farm though, and tell me a little bit about how the farm teaches a person to work hard, because I've heard this repeatedly.
Well, I think, my dad, there were the four of us, and we had cattle and we had hogs. But, we would get up every morning, even before we would go to school. Part of part of our day started with getting up and feeding, or sometimes, even with feeding the baby calves. If there was issues with the mothers, we would bottle feed the baby calves. And so that was part of your day. If the school bus came at 7:30, by 5 o'clock, you were up helping to feed or helping to do some of the chores that were required. And when you got home from school, it was the same thing. And throughout the summer, when you didn't have school, throughout the day, that's one of the things you knew that you had to do, was you had to help on the farm, whether it was in the hoeing the beans, or whether it was helping feed the cattle, or whether it was planting the garden. I mean, you learn that part of life is hard work, and to get pleasure comes work. And so, my father and mother were very, very cautious of all of us being a part of that life, and making sure that we knew, you have to work for things in life. They just don't come to you. And then respecting the value of farm life, respecting that the only way that people survive in this world is food, and we're producing some of that food, whether it be in the crops or whether it be in the cattle, in the hogs. And so I think you have a real appreciation for the life of a farmer and the work that goes into a farm. It's not an easy job, and many times, it's not financially rewarding in terms of trying to raise a family and doing all of this on your own. So I think it taught all of myself and my brothers, I think it taught us a great appreciation for a work ethic, understanding that good things come when you work hard, and everybody can make a contribution to the farm, and that's how we survive. And at the end of the day, that's how our food got put on the table, and that's how Mom and Dad put roof over our head and put us through schools and education and all of those types of things. So I got to tell you, I think for me it was a great, great childhood. It is not what I wanted to do after I grew up, but it was a great childhood, and taught lessons that I think to this day probably have carried through my working career, both professionally and personally.
Do you remember a specific day that was just really hard?
In the summer, we raised a lot of chickens, and we butchered our own chickens. And I remember the first time that I helped butcher chickens, and not a fun task. If you've never butchered a chicken, you have to catch them, you have to chop their head off, and then you scald them in hot water to get the feathers off. And I remember the first time, I had watched Mom do it many times, but always was kind of in the peripheral, playing or doing something. And when I got old enough to say, okay, you're going to be a part of this process, I thought, oh my gosh. So I can remember, and we would butcher, 50 chickens in a day. So you spent 6 or 7 hours catching these chickens, chopping off their heads, plucking them in the scalding water. And then you had to cut them all up. And I can still today, if you gave me a whole fryer, I could cut it up in 2 minutes and I would be perfect, because it's one of those things that we did. But I
it's like riding a bike
at that time.
You pick it right back up.
It just comes back to you.
Give me that chicken.
I don't go buy
I know
chicken
what I'm doing.
I buy my own chickening. So some of the things you learn. But I think I remember. And even on the days when we would butcher in the winter, and so in the, usually the coldest days in December is when you would butcher cattle or hogs, and you would have neighbors, and you all helped each other on these days, but you would have neighbors that got to the house literally at 4 o'clock in the morning, and you would slaughter the cattle, or you'd slaughter the pigs, and you'd spend that whole day. I mean, we would be there in the morning when everybody came. We'd go off to school. We'd come home from school, and there'd still be 40 people going through that process, and they worked all day to do that. And then the next week you went to the next family's house and you did that. So those days you realize the challenge, and you think about how much it takes for that process and to understand and to make that work. But yeah, I think killing the chickens was probably some of the hardest days I ever had. It was not a fun task, and it was part of what we did. So.
Wow. Now, you've already revealed to me your least favorite animal. Did you have a most favorite animal, and maybe even a specific animal, one that you knew by name and just, held very dear?
Yeah, we always had dogs and cats, but I was probably never the greatest fan of cats. I loved our dogs, but we also had a pet pig, and he was my pet pig because he was deaf from birth, so he could never hear, and so it was going to be one of those that you knew wasn't going to be the prized pig, and probably wasn't going to be sold for any value or at the county fair getting the blue ribbons. But he was mine, and so he became a very, very good friend of mine.
Awesome. Okay. Any adventures with that pig? I mean, what did you do together? Was it like pig catch or, checkers? Like what were the games?
Yeah, I think it was mostly he would just follow me around, outside. I mean, when you got an opportunity to laze in the swing tire or just, hang out, he was always there. And, pigs typically are lazy animals. They're not, they're not really. So, but he loved sort of just hanging out. And if I was swinging or reading a book, or if I was, walking, taking a stroll, or, back then, as Mom would always say, just, be back in time for lunch, or if it was the afternoon and you had your chores done, you had to be back in time for dinner. So, you'd spend a lot of time out, walking down the creek or getting in the creek or whatever. And he just followed me everywhere. It was just, it was almost like what I would consider, a lot of people think of their pet dogs, but had a very tragic end to his life. But it was, he was a fun pet to have, and I became very close to him because I always felt sorry for him because we knew that he was deaf. So.
Oh, so sad. Okay, two questions I've got to ask. What was his name, and what was the tragic death? If you feel uncomfortable talking about the death, I'm cool with that. I'm sensitive. Yeah. Okay, but I want to know. Yeah.
Well, it was Porky because what pig wasn't named Porky? So it was Porky. But we also had we lived by the train track. So our farm, right through the middle of our farm, it was split by a train track. And so and we would catch the bus every morning on the other side of the train track. And so he would, like I said, he followed me wherever I go. And usually after we left for school in the mornings, he would be penned up so that he wasn't out and about. And then when I would get home from school, I'd open the pen and he'd come out. Not sure what happened that morning, whether the gate wasn't locked, whether we didn't lock it, forgot, whatever, but we're all standing on the other side of the railroad track waiting for the bus, and we see a train coming. And we could see Porky on the tracks. And, we were screaming at the top of our lungs, knowing he was deaf, but he didn't know that the train was coming. And unfortunately, the train hit him. So, and we all witnessed it, which was a very tough thing. I know.
Like sad.
So, you have... When you grow up on a farm, you have stories, some good, some bad.
They're going to make a movie about that
you have
one
stories
day.
when you grow up on a farm, I think.
Yeah, that's going to be a movie. So that's very heart-wrenching, but very sweet story. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. So you talked about some of the attributes that you have, that you were upfront with people and you wanted to make sure that you were transparent, during this tornado crisis. Are there any experiences as a child that helped encourage you in that direction to be able to, be upfront with people?
Our parents always, I had mischievous brothers and they were always doing something devious, but at the end of the day, I think our parents always taught us you have to be honest. And so if our father ever looked at us and said, who did that? Which one of you? We would fess up, because we thought it was our obligation to fess up. That's the way we were raised. And I think, part of that goes to the fact that you have to own up for things that you're responsible for. And, and on the other side of that, it was the same if there was something good, or if there was something that, one of us did and we didn't take credit for. Our parents always said, you deserve to take the credit for that. You did that. You did more than you were expected to do. So take the credit for that. Or, Mom would come home and all the clothes were folded when it wasn't part of the chore list, and she would say, she knew the boys didn't fold them, so I did. And so, I think you got rewarded for going above and beyond, and at the end of the day, you were expected to tell the truth and to be honest.
If I came home and my kids had folded the laundry, I would pass out. I have no idea how to, what, you folded the laundry? Yeah. That's commendable. Another question, though, along the lines of the farm. What does having animals teach a kid? I mean, can that lead to some good habits financially and business-wise down the line? And are there ways that maybe it can kind of act against that?
Responsibility is certainly one of them. So if we were, our parents always said, you can have pets. And we had a lot of dogs and cats on the farm, but they were never house animals. They were always outside pets. I mean, we had a dog house, but, we did not have animals inside the house. That was taboo with my mother. But, I think they were our responsibility. If you were going to have one, you know what? I'm not going to feed it. My parents weren't going to feed it. So you, whoever, whether it was mine or my brother's, you were expected to take care of it, to feed it, to ensure, its safety. And at the end of the day, if you ever wanted anything for that was above and beyond the food, if you wanted a new collar or you wanted something, then it was your responsibility to go buy it as well. So I think one of the things that having and the boys, and I didn't do this so much, but there was always the county fairs, and the boys always showed their cattle or their hogs in the county fair. And I think when you go back to that pride, and if they did win and that prize money was given, that was theirs for all the work. So they had to make sure that they were shaved and clean and in the best sort of condition that the animals could be in. And if you won, then that money was theirs to keep. It didn't go back to mom or dad. It stayed with you. And so I think it taught you a lot about, there is responsibility if you want to own an animal or a pet. And there are rewards to owning one. Some of that just comes in the love that they give back. Some of that reward comes maybe financially if you're able to sell it later on, if you're able to turn it into a ribbon that ultimately turns into a cash. So I do think, and that was a big part of our life, was learning the responsibility of the animals on the farm. So I think it's a great way to teach young children a lesson about taking care of things, being responsible, know that other people are depending on you. They depended on us to get their food. They depended on us to be there. And so, you learn a lot from that.
Those are some great insights about the effect that an animal can have in the life of a child. Please indulge me with one more animal question. Have you ever seen snakes on a plane?
No, I would never go to see that movie. Never. Because I couldn't sleep at night.
I don't want to add to your distress. I'm like, you think that the snakes are behind you. They're gone. You're working at an airport. What possibly could go wrong? But here comes Samuel L. Jackson, real distress. Actually, I've never seen that movie either, and I never will. And it's not a matter of fear. I just think, that's a bit over the top for me. So
I obviously saw the trailers for it.
Oh, yeah.
But I
your brothers
you
must have
couldn't get me
been
in the theater
Glee.
or in front of the TV to watch that movie.
So any last words of advice for today's parents?
In the world that we live in, which seems, just dysfunctional now, I think respect for things, respect for other human beings, something our parents instilled in us from the time we were born. You say thank you, you say please. I mean, simple things that garner you to understand that there has to be respect for people and things in life. And, I think if you learn that from day one, if you're taught from day one to be respectful of your brothers and sisters and anyone else in the family, that extends out beyond that. And I just think that it's so important that we don't forget to teach our children thankfulness, and we don't forget to teach them about manners and being polite and realizing maybe not everybody does have the luxury of growing up in a family that is close-knit and a family that has that respect. So always try to teach that to others. And I just think it's something in today's world that's so critical that sometimes you look around and you say, do we even talk about manners anymore? Do we even talk about respect for people and others and things? And it's one of those things I think parents should take very seriously. We have 3 children of our own, and they're grown now, and knock on wood, they're great kids. And both my husband and I were raised very similar, and I think we both thought that was important to raise our children that way, to make sure that they understood all the things that life has afforded them, and never forget that, and to always remember that other people may not have had some of those luxuries, but that means you have to, you work hard, you say thank you, you just all those little things that every day adds up to, I think, the integrity of who a person is.
That resonates with me in the sense that not only is this a general society need, but also in the professional world, gratitude goes a long way. And it's amazing when you're working with somebody who has that spirit of gratitude versus somebody who does not. And I've worked with both, and I'm sure you've worked with both. And I think that we assume that, well, you're getting paid, so what reason is there to be grateful? But there is also that spirit of being able to go above and beyond. And I think that is very consistent with respect, that same respect that we should be teaching our children.
Yeah, I would agree. I just think it's so important. And, we're fortunate we now have a 2-year-old grandson, and I watch my daughter and her husband, and I watch them, they say please, say thank you, and so it warms my heart because I see that they're instilling the same thing in him that we instilled in them. And that, we both got from our parents teaching us, my husband and I, when we were very young. So I do think it is something that generations carry on if it becomes part of their daily life.
Speaking of gratitude, do you have a favorite charitable cause or organization?
There's a couple. I was on the Variety board for years. St. Louis, the Children's Variety is an incredible organization, and they help any child in need that's got a physical or mental handicap. And over the years, being on that board for so many years, you met so many families that part of their life every day is dealing with a child who has, is a quadriplegic, a paraplegic, missing arms or missing a limb, and they adapt to that being normal in their life. And when you're an outsider looking in and you see some of the trials these parents have to go through, your heart just sinks. And so I think that organization is incredible for what they try to do to help bring normalcy to a child's life who obviously has challenges. And, they give the family a little bit of relief to partner with other families facing the same things and bring them all together and have children who may have the similar type handicapped or the similar type of disability, bring them to say that they're also not the only child. And the things that they do, the programs that they have for these families is just incredible. So love the organization. I think they're phenomenal. I also love the Habitat for Humanity, another organization I was involved in for years. And when you look at the mission of trying to build affordable homes for families who could never otherwise afford them, and the number of homes that they've been able to build in St. Louis and the families that were able for the first time to own a home, I look at their mission and what they're doing, and they continue to grow in partners. So probably in St. Louis, those are two of my favorite.
Those are wonderful organizations. I appreciate all of your thoughts. This has been a wonderful conversation. I hope that the listeners I think that they'll definitely have some great takeaways from everything that you said. Rhonda, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you, George. Good to talk to you.
Everybody else, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the interview and found useful ideas about things you can do with your kids. Be sure to check the show notes at www.choosethenickel.com for links to names, books, and other resources we discussed in today's show. Also, please subscribe to our newsletter and visit our contact page where you can give us feedback. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube, and you can follow Choose the Nickel on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We invite you to share Choose the Nickel with your friends and join us in our quest to teach kids financial freedom.